In the 1960s, the Congo was one of the most resource-rich countries in the world. It had copper, diamonds, gold, cobalt, oil, and uranium. On paper, it had everything needed to become a powerful and stable nation. Instead, it became a case study in dictatorship, corruption, and state collapse. At the center of that story was one man, Mobutu Sese Seko. He ruled for 32 years. To understand how he stayed in power that long, we have to go back to independence of the country. By the way, if you enjoy stories of people, places, and purpose, welcome to Living with Charlie, where we explore real lives and the lessons they carry. Here, we learn from others so we can live more richly and more intentionally. If that resonates with you, I invite you to subscribe and join our growing community. Now, back to our story. Congo gained independence from Belgium in 1960. The first prime minister was Patrice Lumumba. Lumumba believed Congo's resources should benefit its people. But this was Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union were competing for influence across the world. When Lumumba asked the Soviet Union for assistance during internal unrest, Western governments became concerned. Congo had strategic minerals, including uranium, that had previously been used in nuclear weapons. The West felt Congo was too important to fall into Soviet influence. At that time, the army chief was a young officer named Joseph Mobutu. In September 1960, Mobutu announced that the military would temporarily take control to restore order. Lumumba was arrested. Months later, he was killed. The country entered a period of instability. Mobutu presented himself as neutral and disciplined. In 1965, during another political crisis, he carried out a second coup. This time, he did not return power, he became president. Once in power, Mobutu understood that survival depended on international backing. During the Cold War, anti-communist leaders were valuable to the West. Mobutu positioned himself clearly on the side of the United States. He built relationships with Western leaders, including Richard Nixon. He received military aid, loans, and diplomatic support. In return, he aligned his country with Western interests in Central and Southern Africa. He supported anti-Marxist movement in Angola. He allowed Western companies continued access to mining operations. For the United States and its allies, Mobutu offered stability in a strategically important region. Concerns about corruption and repression were often overlooked. As long as the Cold War continued, Mobutu remained useful. This usefulness protected him. External support was only a part of the strategy. Mobutu also reshaped the country internally. In 1971, he renamed Congo as Zaire. He renamed cities and encouraged citizens to drop European names. He discouraged Western dress and promoted traditional clothing. He called this policy Authenticité. It was presented as a cultural pride, but it also strengthened his personal authority. He changed his own name to Mobutu Sese Seko Kuku Ngbedu wa Zabanga. His image appeared everywhere, in schools, on television, on public buildings. Zaire became a one-party state. The popular movement of the revolution was the only legal political party. Elections were organized, but real competition did not exist. Opposition voices were silenced. The political system became centered around one individual. At the same time, Mobutu built a system that tied loyalty to access to wealth. In the 1970s, he launched a policy known as Zaireanization. Foreign-owned businesses were seized. Instead of building public ownership, these businesses were handed to political allies and military officers. Many were mismanaged. Production declined. The economy weakened, but loyalty to Mobutu increased. Access to state resources depended on staying close to him. Corruption was not accidental, it was organized. Senior officers were allowed to enrich themselves as long as they remained loyal. Large sums of state money were transferred abroad into private accounts. Meanwhile, the government borrowed heavily from international institutions. By the 1980s, debt was rising and infrastructure was collapsing. Inflation increased. Public servants went unpaid. Soldiers, underpaid and frustrated, began extorting civilians at checkpoints. The state grew weaker, even though Mobutu remained personally powerful. In his hometown, Gbadolite, Mobutu built a large palace complex with modern facilities and a private airport. The contrast between personal luxury and national decline became clear. But as long as Western backing continued, his position remained secure. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. The Cold War began to end. Without the Soviet threat, Mobutu's strategic importance declined. Western governments increasingly spoke about democracy and reform. Inside Zaire, opposition movements gained strength. Economic conditions worsened. Strikes and protests became more common. Mobutu announced political reforms and allowed limited multi-party activity. But the reforms were slow and controlled. Then, in 1994, the Rwandan genocide destabilized the region. Armed groups crossed into eastern Zaire. The already weakened state struggled to respond. In 1996, a rebel movement led by Laurent Desire Kabila began advancing across the country. Backed by regional powers, the rebels captured territory quickly. The National Army, weakened by years of corruption and poor funding, offered limited resistance. Mobutu was ill and often outside the country for medical treatment. In May 1997, rebel forces entered the capital. Mobutu fled. After 32 years, his rule ended. Zaire was renamed the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Mobutu went into exile in Morocco. He died there in September 1997. His political system did not disappear immediately. The institutions had already been weakened. The economy was fragile. The country soon entered further conflict. Mobutu's rule left long-term effect on governance and political culture. He was responsible for large-scale corruption and repression, but he also demonstrated how a leader can survive by combining internal control with external alliances. For decades, he aligned himself with global power dynamics. When those dynamics changed, his protection disappeared. His story shows how strategic usefulness can sustain authority, but only temporarily, and how a state built around one individual becomes vulnerable when that individual falls.